Right. Well, since it's 7 o'clock, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Friends of San Pedro Valley Parks Natural History Lecture Series. I'm Alys Granados, Director of Programs and your host and facilitator for tonight's program. I'm very pleased that you've taken the time to join us tonight. I hope that you will continue to support the Friends by attending the webinars and becoming members if you are not already one. Just a reminder that questions will be taken at the end of the lecture and the speakers will answer as many as time permits. Please write them in the Q&A rather than chat. I'll check there as well, but chat's just for inter attendee or just a comment or whatever, but for questions, it's helpful to have them in one place. A quick word on the upcoming lecture on Tuesday, February 22nd at 7 p.m. We're going to have Morgan Stickrod with us, and he's going to present a lecture on native trees of California. It'll be a botany lecture. He's previously given us lectures on the native flora and fauna of the Farallon Islands, and he was lucky enough to be out there, one of the few. And native plants of California, and join us for an informative and awe-inspiring talk on the beautiful native trees found throughout California. And we have approximately 150 species of native trees in the California floristic province, from the tallest, oldest, and largest trees on Earth, and iconic species. So we'll be hearing about them and a lot more. Our presenters this evening are Zara McDonald, researcher and founder of Felidae Conservation Fund, and Alys Granados, ecologist and researcher at Felidae as well. And today's lecture, as you can well see, and as you've read and reread, I'm sure many times in the newsletter, on the website and wherever else, that we are going to be hearing all about our wonderful bobcats in the San Francisco Bay Area, the biology and ecology of a native mesocarnivore. So a little about Zara. She's a biologist, a researcher, an entrepreneur, heads Felidae Conservation Fund, and has traveled extensively throughout 4 continents on behalf of wild felid research and conservation since 2002. She's feeling a little under the weather today, folks. So if you hear a raspy voice, that's Zara, but she is with us. And Alys Granados is going to be taking the lead on this talk today, and she's interested in using science to inform wildlife conservation strategies in partnership with diverse groups of stakeholders. She has a PhD in zoology from the University of British Columbia, Canada, where she used camera traps to measure the impacts of logging on wildlife in Malaysia and Borneo. Following her PhD, she returned to Borneo to work on field research manager for the Gunung Palung Orangutan Conservation Program. Most recently, Alys was a postdoc at the University of British Columbia, where she studied multi-scale effects of recreation and land use on mammals in Western Canada. So, Alys, take it away with Zara.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Alys. Nice to meet you all. And we're happy to be here today to share some information with you about bobcats and their role as mesocarnivores. So first of all, we just want to start off with a little super quick introduction about what Felidae Conservation Fund is, in case you're not familiar with it. So it's a nonprofit based in the Bay Area. It began in 2006 with a more like global focus. So with more like international field work. And today we still have some international field work and projects going on, but there's more of a focus on the NorCal projects and the Bay Area Puma project, as well as the Bay Area Bobcat project. And so the kind of mission of Felidae is to strengthen the conservancy of native felid populations within local and global ecosystems and use innovative approaches to research, education, and community stewardship. And yeah, I just joined Felidae, I think at the end of October. So yeah, super happy to be here and yeah, share all this with you guys. Okay, so in the Bay Area, as many of you I'm sure already know, we have 2 species of wild felids or cats. So one of which is the bobcat and the other is the mountain lion or the puma or the cougar. And so just so we all kind of are straight with like who we're talking about today, just showing you this diagram, because it might seem like pretty obvious most of the time, but sometimes it can be hard to tell, especially when you're comparing age classes, or if you're looking at some of the like camera trap photos. So depending on the angle or the light. So it can be a little tricky and not always super straightforward. And so, of course, you have a difference in size between the mountain lion and the bobcat. So yeah, bobcats are only about 1/4 to less than half the size of a mountain lion. They're generally 2 to 3 times as large as a domestic house cat, but compared to the house cat, they're more muscular and full in body. And of course, one of the other giveaways is, well, you can see it from, or you can know it from the name of the bobcat. So the bobcat refers to the bobbed tail compared to the mountain lion, which has that long tail with the black tip at the end. Okay, so we're just going to start off with some basics about bobcats, like their physical characteristics. The scientific name is Lynx rufus, so the genus is Lynx, rufus being the species. They're not the only species in the lynx genus, so we also have the Canada lynx, Lynx canadensis, and then the Eurasian lynx. But in the Bay Area, we only have the bobcat, so Lynx rufus is the only one that you'll come across. And so in terms of body mass, they can be anywhere from 9 to 35 pounds, with the females being smaller. They can be 24 to 48 inches in length, and they can jump up to 12 vertical feet. And as adults, they're usually solitary. And then just a little bit more about like how they live. They breed annually starting in their 2nd year of life, and they can have anywhere from 1 to 6 kittens. The eyes of the kittens will be open by day 9, and they will be weaned at about 2 months. So that's when the mom will start, well, when they will stop suckling from the mother, and then they'll leave the mother at about 8 months of age. And then they can live in the wild about like 10 to 15 years. And this is just a cute video that hopefully works. Yeah, where you can just see a cute video of bobcat family. This is from one of our camera traps set up in the Bay Area. So we have a network of camera traps, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. But the cameras are set up to measure how bobcats and other species respond to human activity and footprint. And yeah, sometimes we get some nice videos like this one. And so where do bobcats live? So we're just going to start off with like large scale focus and then zoom in on different aspects of their ecology. So this map is from the IUCN and it shows their overall range. So this is basically like all the places where they could potentially be found based on habitat availability and presence of prey species, amongst some other things.
Hey,
So
Alice.
Yeah.
Someone's asking if you can you put it in presentation mode? Because I think we're back in just so they can see it at a larger scale.
Yeah, one sec.
You did it before.
Yeah. Oh, one sec here.
Alice, can you slow down just a bit when you're talking?
Oh yeah, sure. Sorry.
Going a mile a minute here.
Sorry, just let me get onto this one.
Try putting it in presentation mode and then sharing. If
Yeah.
you can. I know it's kind of strange because sometimes people lose the controls and they can't find them once they do that.
You can't see anything, can you?
Nope.
Okay. Know where it went.
No.
Okay.
Is it helpful to start again, or?
I think I just.
I mean, in terms of the actual what PowerPoint, and then just move ahead.
It's fine. It's just I have too many monitors here. That's all.
Okay, mission control, we get it. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Okay. Okay. Does that look?
That's better.
Yeah, that's
Okay,
much better.
cool.
Okay.
Good job.
All right.
Okay. One sec. Let's find where we were. Okay, so yeah, we're just going to start off talking about like the overall range of where bobcats can occur. And so this is just shows like everywhere that they could potentially be found based on potential like prey, potential habitat. You can see it's pretty big. So it starts off from like northern Canada going all the way down to northern Mexico and coast to coast in the US. And so this kind of gives an indication just how like potentially adaptable these species are. And so we'll talk a little bit more about like why that is that they're so adaptable. I just want to bring your attention to this Iucn status in the corner. So Iucn is the World Conservation Union. And so they're the ones that figure out the level of, I guess, threat that is placed upon these species. And so they have determined that the bobcat is classified as least concern. So on one spectrum, you have least concern, and then the other spectrum would be critically endangered or extinct. And so they've also determined that the population is classified as stable as well. But just something to note is that when you see these Iucn statuses, that this refers to like the status of the whole population. So everything inside this kind of map, basically, whereas it's important to remember that in some specific locations, like maybe certain regions or certain states or certain parts of the country, that you might not have this like stable population. So in some cases, they might be decreasing or they might even be increasing as well. Okay, and so if we zoom in a little bit more, we can think about, well, where do they live within this like wide range? And so the home range of bobcats is from 5 to 53 square kilometers. And so that just means their home range is like where they might use, all the areas they might potentially use for their daily activities. So finding food, finding mates, shelter, and then we can figure out where their home range is by tracking their movements. So this kind of map in the corner shows the home range of 3 different bobcats. So this was determined by some researchers in Southern California. And so they had GPS trackers on these bobcats. And so the trackers would tell them different locations that the individuals used. And so at the end of their study, they were able to draw basically like a boundary around all of those locations. And then say, okay, this is where this one individual is mostly using, and then this is where the other one is. And then basically, yeah, it just gives an idea of what places are most important for bobcats to survive. So within these kind of home ranges, we can ask, well, what are they actually looking for? And so we said that bobcats can live in different types of habitats. So that could be like woodland habitat, so coniferous, deciduous, mixed habitat, and then also urban areas too. And then just some of the areas that they can't live in is like some of these like high agricultural land areas, just because there's not that, the food availability isn't there. And so within these habitats, what are they actually eating? So one of the things that makes them so like adaptable and able to live in all these different places is their diet. And so they eat a wide variety of foods, and that includes animals like fawns of white-tailed deer, some mice or rats, rabbits, and then also raccoons, and then even amphibians, insects, and plants as well from time to time. And so we said before that they are carnivores, but you can see this is a wide kind of range of things that they can eat. And that is related to also the ability of them to live in all these different kinds of habitats. So we can compare that to an animal like a tiger that is more of a specialist carnivore and requires or has a greater reliance on meat than something like a bobcat would. And then you can relate that to how, you know, the wide range of these bobcats versus that of the tiger. So just something to keep in mind. And another reason why these guys have been so adaptable across the North America. Okay, and then we just have some more visuals here. So a bobcat that we found on one of our camera traps a couple years ago, carrying some prey, and then just another video of this bobcat sniffing around looking for some food. Okay, and then thinking more about like what they eat, one of the questions you might have is, well, how do they actually, how do they get their food? And so they usually stalk or ambush their prey and hunt by sight or sound. And so I just took this clip from the BBC Earth, just so you can get an idea of what a potential like pouncing on prey might look like. So this was just getting ready to jump, basically doing like similar type of thing if it was trying to get an animal. But this case is just kind of trying to cross the river. And then another related video that shows a little bit more of how they hunt. So in this case, the animal's not trying to jump across something to get something, but it's trying to jump up. And so this really speaks to their ability to get up into the trees and get those kind of arboreal animals. And so you can see the bobcat's getting ready to jump. And then basically like the camera can't even follow all the way just because of that amazing jumping ability. And then I think we got, he did get the squirrel it was. And then one more video, just because we like showing videos of bobcats, and especially all the ones that we can get as part of the Bay Area Bobcat Project, just showing how playful and cute these animals can be. And then after they hunt, so they'll often eat the food that they get, or they might leave it and come back for it later. So they also are known to cache their food. So that just means that they're stashing it coming back later. So they will cover the leftovers with grass, twigs, and then revisit. And then, so this video is from the Borderlands Research Institute, and they just got this footage of the bobcat trying to cover up this hog that it got. Not doing a very good job, but still trying, basically just showing the kind of general behavior. Okay, and then just finally ending off a little bit more about what they're eating. We're now going to talk about their roles in terms of like what it means ecologically. So bobcats are mesocarnivores. So they're carnivores to start, but then if you kind of dial in more into that, then they're classified as mesocarnivores. So meso just means middle, so that means that they're the middle ranking predator. So we start off with the apex predator, and then the next would be these mesocarnivores and predators. And so as a whole, this group tends to be more urban, so it can withstand a little bit more human disturbance than something like, say, a mountain lion or African lion, things like that. As a whole, the group is anywhere from less than 15 to 20 kilograms in size, so they're smaller in body size. They tend to be more numerous as well than those larger apex predators, and are often seen as pests or vermin. And so these are just some examples of some of the meso predators or carnivores that exist. There's a lot more than this, but some of them here are gray fox, red fox, raccoons, coyotes, and then wolverine as well. And like I said, there's other ones like possums and skunks. And then just to kind of further dial in on what we mean by the difference between an apex predator and a meso predator or carnivore. So apex predator would be animals like African or mountain lions, tigers, gray wolves, jaguars, and then again, the other difference is the meso predator there. So I said before that they're more numerous than the apex predators. So you might be wondering, like, well, then who cares about mesocarnivores? Like, if we don't have them, so what? There's already a bunch of them. But they are really ecologically important. So they can influence wildlife community structure, especially in the absence of apex predators. So to start, mesopredators play an important role in controlling the rodent populations. So they do serve or provide the role of like pest control. And then more and more, it's kind of being researched in terms of like, well, if you don't have those apex predators, what is going to happen to the mesopredators? And then what is that going to mean for other interacting species? So we know that in a lot of the world, those larger carnivores are being persecuted. So that includes wolves, mountain lions, tigers, lions. So a lot of times those are kind of the first to start to decline, or they might be more vulnerable to different forms of hunting or habitat disturbance. So then we ask, well, what is that going to mean for the other species in the ecosystem? And so in some cases, it could be that the mesopredator comes in and fills that ecological role. Maybe it doesn't matter if we don't lose those large carnivores because the other ones are going to just come and take that role and it'll be fine. Or it could mean that maybe that one tries to take the other role of the apex predator, but then maybe they're taking too much of a certain kind of prey, or maybe they're just taking the wrong age classes. So that could kind of throw the ecosystem a little bit like out for a loop. So apex predators are super important because they keep those mesopredators in check themselves. But the kind of overall take home from all of this is that having an intact ecosystem is just super important to maintain some sort of level of stability or equilibrium in the ecosystem. And so we just have an example here of something that could happen when some of these interactions are disrupted. And so we have coyotes and then wolves. In a lot of parts of North America, there has been wolf decline. So that could be due to a number of reasons like overhunting or habitat loss. But that has been associated with increases in coyotes. And so what has happened in some places is that there has been something called mesocarnivore release. And this is kind of like consequences that is being investigated more and more because we want to know if that is something that's happening a lot of places or just some. But what this means is that the loss of an apex predator is accompanied by or results in the increase of the mesocarnivore. And so, the consequences for interacting species, like I said, are still being investigated, but this is something that we're also looking into as well with our camera trap data. And so next, we're just going to talk a little bit more about some of the threats faced by bobcats. So one of the main ones, which is a threat to species all over, is habitat fragmentation, habitat loss. And this is, of course, the case in the San Francisco Bay Area as well. So a lot of habitat is being increasingly fragmented. And so this is a map from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and they just mapped wildlife habitat in green, and then the yellow shows kind of the linkages between those habitats, and yellow represents kind of like easier for animals to get across those areas, and red represents areas that are not so easy for them to traverse. And so some of the questions that we're asking as part of Felidae is, well, what are the important areas linking habitat for bobcats, and which habitat linkages allow movement of individuals? So having habitat fragmentation is a problem because we know that it could reduce population numbers of some animals. So if they can't get from one side to another, they won't be able potentially to find mates, so then they can't reproduce, or maybe they just can't access important areas. So areas important for shelter or just for finding prey. And so this is something that we're looking into through our camera trap network that is set up kind of across this whole area, spanning gradient of human disturbance, habitat types, and distance to different urban areas. And so another threat to bobcats is illegal hunting. So a couple years ago, I think bobcat hunting ended officially in California, but of course, even though you end something legally, sometimes there's still illegal hunting that continues. And so this is a problem here, but there's also the issue of legal hunting in other parts of North America. And so legally, bobcats can still be hunted in 28 states, as well as 7 Canadian provinces and much of northern Mexico. And so this is associated with a demand for their pelts, which, I mean, it's hard to know right now what the consequences are going to be long-term for this, if it continues, and kind of what the trends are. But kind of the main thing that we need to monitor as researchers is what the effects might be for other species in the ecosystem. because as we said before, bobcats can control rodent populations, which could affect the way that rodents then interact with plants or other species, and that could contribute to reduced or just kind of altered biodiversity. Another threat that is faced by bobcats as well as other species in this area is that of rodenticide. So people will use rodenticides to try and as a form of like pest control against small mammals, namely rodents, but other animals will eat them too. And so as you can see in the diagram, other animals will then eat those, and then it kind of just like trickles up the food web. And so anticoagulant rodenticides in particular might interfere with blood clotting and ultimately can cause death through cardiovascular shock. And so a pretty nasty way to die. And so something that we are working on in the next few months as part of Felidae is doing a project where we're collecting scat, so the feces of bobcats and pumas. And we want to take those samples, analyze them in a lab, and then figure out the extent to which different scat samples from different areas have rodenticides and toxins. Now we can use that to think about what factors are affecting the extent to which people are using those rodenticides and where, and then we can prioritize those areas for different outreach or community work. And then something else we are interested in, besides figuring out how human activity spatially displaces bobcats and other wildlife, something that's being kind of more and more looked into in the research world is, well, what is the consequences for activity patterns of animals? And so there was a study done by Dr. Riley from Northern Arizona University. And what they did was they looked at when humans were most active in protected areas in the Bay Area. And so not surprisingly, people were most active like during the middle of the day. So when you go hiking, I mean, it's during the daytime too, it's not at night. But then what was really interesting was when they modeled when other animals like bobcats were most active. And what they found was that it didn't really matter if there was a lot of people, like a lot of recreationists in a given protected area versus not so many, but bobcats tended to be less active when people were more active. So it's kind of like a opposite relationship. And so their findings suggest that reduced activity by bobcats when more people are around. And so something that's that I'm finding really interesting and something that I would like to look into more is thinking about more what type of activities by humans kind of lead to this response amongst bobcats. So is it just because there's people in general, or is it because there's people cycling at that particular place and time? Is it because people are accompanied by dogs? Or is it because you're closer to areas that are super like kind of urban developed? And just what are the other factors that might influence this relationship? This is something, like I said, that we're going to be thinking about more and more and kind of building off of this kind of like foundational work by Dr. Bradley and the colleagues. And then you might be wondering, where are bobcats in the Bay Area? Because I keep kind of mentioning that as if they're all around, and they kind of are widespread throughout. And so on this map on the left, you can see some of these green areas, and that's where we've detected more bobcats over the years through our camera trap. So these kind of more like kind of denser places are where we've had more detections, but you can also see it's kind of spread out all throughout. And then for the map on the right, this is more just like a zoomed in version of the South Bay. And so you can also see here with a darker red where we had more bobcat sightings too. And then in 2018, the Felidae researchers did a study of bobcat scat in Marin. And so they got 103 fecal samples. So they searched for just scat of bobcats, and then were able to extract DNA from 75%. And they used 2 molecular procedures. And they got 16 scat samples, which provided a full genotype, which at the end of after all the analysis allows you to determine that those came from 12 individuals. So these scat studies are also super important because they tell us what is the density of these different animals in these different areas and how might that change with different forms of human disturbances or human activity. Okay, and then we just want to finish off talking about what do you do if you see a bobcat? So first of all, we want you to let us know. You can go to this URL at the bottom, and this is the Bay Area Puma and Bobcat project sightings map, and you can enter in your information, basically just your email, and then drop a pin on this map of the Bay Area and tell us where you saw the animal that you are saying that you saw or that you think you saw. So you can tell us the time of day, whether it was a Puma, whether it was a Bobcat, or whether it was something else, and then what season it was. So having these sightings contributed by people like everyone here is super important because we don't have cameras across all of the Bay Area as much as we'd like to. And so having this kind of information helps like supplement our knowledge, and then just tells us areas that might be places we want to prioritize for future education work. If there's a lot of sightings of animals, say like in super urban area, and people are worried about that, then we can kind of address that through some sort of education. And then we want to also talk about how you might be able to coexist with bobcats. So I said before, they're not super dangerous, but we just want to show you this video that a hiker took in Marin. And so this animal is coming super close to a person, but then runs away. And we think it was a younger one, which didn't really know to stay away from people. But you can see like this one not shy at all. And so the reason for showing you this is just so you can see it's not an animal that needs to be like super feared, but at the same time, it's super important they never approach a bobcat. And the best sighting or encounter like this is an uneventful one where everyone just kind of goes their separate ways and then nothing happens. But still super cool sighting to be able to see that. Okay, so like I said, they're normally wary of people. Usually you won't see bobcats. They're usually not active during the day, even though this is changing, especially as there's just more and more urban development. And then what can you do to try and reduce the chance of any negative encounters with bobcats? So you can basically make your property less attractive to bobcats. And this goes for pumas as well. And so you can remove bird feeders in some places if you're uneasy with the amount of bobcats visiting your property. You can trim the trees and shrubs to remove bobcat hiding spots. You keep your cats inside. And if your dogs are outside, like best not to leave them outside overnight so you don't have any negative encounters with or attacks from wildlife, and keep them leashed during the day. You can install motion detectors, and then you can secure your garbage in animal-proof lids. And so even though it seems like bobcats aren't super dangerous, there is the potential threat of them eating people's pets. And so again, this is just to reiterate what I've been saying before, why it's really important that cats are kept inside, because basically if you're leaving them walking around, that's kind of just like attracting, it's just attracting them to come and be eaten, free food for them. So yeah, just something to keep in mind depending on where you live. And then finally, we just want to finish off inviting you to check out our new website. This was launched, I think, just over a week ago. So the URL is just felidaefund.org. And then you can read more about our Bay Area Bobcat project and how we're studying things related to habitat loss and fragmentation of bobcats. You can share what you learned today, which is also super important and really helpful for us, especially with respect to preventing disinformation of things that people are saying about bobcats or cougars as well. You can volunteer and help by getting involved, make a donation, support us on Amazon. If you have any questions, you can email info@felidaefund.org. And you can also follow us on social media at Felidae Fund. So it's on Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn as well. And then finally, just want to thank all our funders and collaborators. So there's a bunch of them here. Won't read them all, but yeah, if anyone has any questions, just let us know. So we can skip through or flew through some of that, but yeah, hopefully it was okay.
Thank you, Alys. That was very interesting. Have you actually done much research in San Pedro Valley Park? We have, well, our bobcats here are very much a flagship type and species. We love our bobcats. We see them every so often, and they tend to be they tend to hide. They're not really up in the open unless they're crossing a path, or you just happen to be in the right place at the right time. And they love the gophers. So that's good. That's good.
Mhm.
So are there any camera traps in San Pedro Valley Park? Are you doing any, looking into the number of bobcats there? Anything at all?
You want me to answer that, Alice?
Sure.
We have, I think, 1 or 2 cameras in San Pedro currently, and this spring we are increasing our coverage to accommodate a grant for Puma research that also will include collection of bobcat data. And we already are collecting quite a bit of bobcat data, and Alice sort of touched on what we're looking at and the questions we'd like to answer. One of the reasons you're not seeing bobcats is they're incredibly elusive. They avoid humans and usually will try not to be seen, much like pumas. But occasionally, and in areas where they're more used to humans, in Marin, we have a lot of people that run across them on trails frequently. So, and there's also a reason for that in Marin, given that we've sort of lost a lot of the presence of pumas in southern Marin. So the bobcats have kind of become the quasi-apex predator in parts of Marin. So they kind of feel a little more bold.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, Marin has a lot of open space and a lot of hiking trails that are open, and yeah. So a lot of bicycling going on. So yeah.
The areas where they're mostly seen in Marin is, the area that is where there's most abundance is Tennessee Valley, and that's a high sort of an abundance of hikers and walkers and runners, and so there's a lot of activity in there, but people do see them. It's not typical because bobcats tend to avoid being seen. That's their usual behavior.
Well, it's very much a feline trait. I mean, cats don't really like to be out in the open, do they?
Well, that's my point. In some areas of Marin, they don't mind you watching them hunt, and they'll just ignore you.
Ah,
So that's, in part, we think because of just dynamics and behaviors have changed because they don't have a top predator in the areas where we're seeing this happen.
well, at least we have our pumas here, that's for certain. We have, as you well know from your talk that you gave us in 2020 in August, Zara, we have quite a lot of mountain lions that are walking around and causing, I don't know whether people are as disturbed as they were before or as worried about it, but they're certainly seeing on their video cameras and on their on any device that they put up and attach, they see that there's been a mountain lion in the vicinity, but they haven't really spotted bobcats because those are usually, I don't know, I think they're usually in the park. I don't know if they wander out from San Pedro here, but they're bound to, I suppose. But I haven't seen on Nextdoor anything much about bobcats sort of wandering around. They have, they have their apex predator here, so they're kept in check.
Right. So someone's asking how mountain lions and bobcats interact. Alice, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, so I think we were mentioning before that like the cougars or the mountain lions, whatever, will keep the bobcats in check just kind of through their presence. Bobcats won't go some places just because they know that there's pumas there. But at the same time, some of the larger prey that pumas will take down, they might leave, and then the bobcats will benefit from kind of getting to scavenge on some of those prey items. So it's not really like, it's beneficial sometimes, but it's not something that they're always kind of reliant on, not like a mutual relationship, but yeah.
So folks, those who are attending, can you put your questions in Q&A rather than the chat? If there are certain comments that you want to have going back and forth between attendees, that's fine. But the Q&A would be easier for us to just follow the questions and see them. So yeah, Q&A is a good location for questions. So
I was looking at the questions in the chat, but I'll check out the Q&A.
there's
Sarah asked if that was one of our cameras on the Valley View Trail, and yes, you're right.
there's a question from Eugenia about how do you detect an anticoagulant in Scat?
Basically, it's toxicology. So the toxicology tests for the chemicals that are present in rodenticides, and if that's present, it will show up in the Scat.
So this anticoagulant is actually included in the rodenticides.
No, well, it's chemicals. So there are 3 or 4 of the most dangerous chemicals that are used in some of these anticoagulant rodenticides, and those will, yes, show up in the toxicology that is performed in the lab from the fecal samples.
Well, that is a horrid way to go, isn't it? And there, someone back to the Scat, and William is asking, how do we identify Bobcat Scat? Is it obviously smaller than the Puma?
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of information on that, I think, on our website, as well as, I guess we should have included some pictures here, but it's segmented. It's very similar to Puma Scat, just smaller. And usually when people think they've seen Puma Scat, it's actually Bobcat Scat. And it's tapered at the end. It's usually full of hair and sometimes bones. Anything else you would add to that, Alice?
No, I was just looking for the link. So I was going to put it in the chat.
Yeah, good. Yeah, we have a lot of information sheets with Scat identification tips and visuals if you're interested.
And William, right at the beginning, he was asking about in the habitat map that why can't the bobcats can't be found in the section immediately to the west of the Great Lakes, or seems to be Wisconsin and Minnesota.
Yeah, so I mean, Alice may have a thought, but I would answer that with hunting. Increased levels of hunting in those areas.
Oh, really?
That was my guess as well.
Yeah, I mean, they can survive to a point, but if they're overhunted, they're not going to persist.
Right, they're going to go somewhere else, and then right. So, and Eugenia is asking about urbanization and that affecting their home range. So,
yeah, like any of these animals, including pumas, it will shrink the home range, forces it to shrink, given that there's less available territory and habitat that's not fragmented. However, the urbanization effects that are positive for bobcats, as Alice mentioned, are that the food availability or their prey availability is more accessible. They have subsidies from human residential areas and humans being present there. That makes it easier for them to get prey, to feed themselves, and to not go as far. So their home ranges don't need to be as large.
They're also smaller, so they don't need such a large range, do they?
No, yeah, just not as large as they would be in the wilderness. Bobcats are, I wasn't comparing them to pumas. They're completely different. So bobcat home range is in the wilderness, say, if you look at a bobcat home range in the Los Padres or even Hamilton Range, you're probably going to see a larger home range for bobcat than you will see in the San Francisco Bay Area, because they simply don't need to go as far to get food, but they also don't have as much habitat to cover. It's more difficult to access, and the connectivity becomes an issue.
Mm. Well, it seems this lack of connectivity seems to be a problem with a great many species now.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And we have turkeys in San Pedro Valley Park. I keep returning to San Pedro Valley Park because it's where the Friends are basically a type of guardian group. And we have turkeys there too. Do they prey on turkeys by any chance?
We wish that mountain lions would prey on them more. They don't as much as we'd like. They're not a preferred menu item. And unfortunately for bobcats either, which is why we can't seem to get their numbers down.
Maybe all the feathers.
Yeah.
Okay, so all right, what else do we have here?
Oh yeah, the catio is great, Mike.
Built a catio. What is a catio?
I would like to do that. That's a great idea. Tell him what it is, or can he? You can't.
No one can. Everyone is
Yeah.
muted.
Catio is like an enclosure outside for your pet, so usually for cats, so that cats can actually feel like they're out in the wilderness, but they're not, and they're not preying on, well, they're not getting preyed on by coyotes or mountain lions or bobcats, but they're also not taking birds in the area as well. It's just a nice thing to do.
They get outside, but stay safe.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Well, here between coyotes and mountain lions, and if you have pets and they're outdoors, they're gone. Especially when everyone is having their pets and reproducing, and I mean their pups or their kittens or whatever. Lots of home little animals disappear, and very quickly. Let's see. Do other felid species have short tails besides bobcats and lynxes? Is there an advantage to having a short little tail?
Well, yeah, I mean, so compare that to the mountain lion, which uses its tail for balance, and it's a big leaper, climbing trees often. Alys can add to this as well, but bobcats and lynx typically belonging to the lynx genus, they hunt on the ground. And so they're usually looking for rodents and hares, and so they have not evolved to have this long tail. So it's not something that served them.
No, obviously not.
Yeah, and also if you think of the bobcat like pouncing into the snow or whatever, the long tail wouldn't be as good for that.
It would be a dead giveaway, right? And rather cumbersome. And how often do the bobcats reproduce? Eric is asking, in the number of kittens.
You had a slide up there, didn't you?
Yeah, 1 to 6, and then every year. Well, I guess I just said it. I don't need to go to the slide. Yeah, so they don't have a ton of babies all the time. 1 to 6 is like the range, but yeah.
And bobcats don't hunt cooperatively, and I don't think pumas hunt cooperatively. Eric is asking, do they occasionally hunt? It's not.
So pumas will eat bobcats, and so they stay the heck out of the way if they want to survive, but they will at times trail mountain lions to feed on their kills when mountain lions have moved on. We do get bobcats and coyotes sharing kills. We have a great video of that. I should have sent that to you, Alys. And so they will tolerate one another, but they don't, cooperate together or work together. It's not a usual thing.
And Bing is asking, do maturing bobcats need to expand to new territory? Because with all those little kittens, they've got to go somewhere, no?
Yeah, the dispersing young cats do disperse and find new territory for sure. And that's where it becomes an issue in the urban edge. If there is no territory, or if it's so fragmented or dangerous, this is where it becomes tricky for them. And of course, bobcat kittens are much more vulnerable, and it's pretty risky when they're, before they disperse, where they can be picked off by coyotes or even dogs, or obviously mountain lions.
And Andy is asking whether you can tell the sexes apart, and are there behaviors that tell them apart?
That's a good question. Alys?
Well, I was going to say, well, just from the body size, but mostly when we see them from the camera trap photos, we can't tell individual IDs. I don't think the technology is there for that yet, but yeah, not that I'm aware of. I don't know if you know, Zara.
Well, yeah. I mean, behavior-wise, that's interesting. It's like what we see with mountain lions. It's quite similar. The spot on the rear, Andy, as well as the some of the marking territorial behaviors by the males, which you'd see more of from males.
The marking, yes. That makes sense. But they're really quite, they're so cute with all their stripes, the striped face that they have. And they're so chunky, they're just adorable looking, not, you just want to go and hug them, but of course they're wild, so not a good idea. What about, there's someone who's asking about coyote bobcat interaction.
Yeah, I think I answered that, but I mentioned that we have a video where they're feeding together on the same carcass, and they're not, side by side, they're at the opposite ends of it, but they spend quite a bit of time both feeding and kind of ignoring each other. One's tugging it one way and one's tugging it the other. So they will tolerate each other, but they tend to avoid, coyotes for sure avoid areas where mountain lions are. So, with bobcats, it's very similar.
So they're not, I gather the bobcats are not into turkeys, as you said, and they're not into Canada geese either, for that matter, I would assume. Laura is asking about Canada geese. Are the bobcats at all interested in larger wildlife, birds per se?
It's not a main prey item.
No,
that I know of. Yeah, I mean, the largest they'll go after is they will take down fawns. Bobcats have taken down, female deer. So it just depends on the bobcat, and they can take down 2 to 3 times their size if they need to, but typically they have sort of all the small mammals they go after on the ground.
And how do the vocalizations of pumas and bobcats differ, which we haven't discussed? Laura is asking.
Yeah, they're very similar to pumas again. There's a lot of like purring, and it's very similar to your house cat. So you can think of your house cat and think of bobcat sounds. We probably could have added some of those tonight too.
Okay. And and Andy is asking, do male bobcats kill male cubs or run them out of their territories, or do they patrol territories like male pumas do?
Very rare that the males play a role in bobcat cubs' lives, but yes, they will. There is infanticide with bobcats as well as mountain lions. So yes, they will kill them to make that female go back into estrus.
Hmm. Okay. And for those who were interested in the websites, and Alys has put up a whole bunch of them in regarding Scat and so on in chat. So check that out, folks.
Yeah, there's on that webpage, there's some pictures for identifying Pumas scat, Bobcat scat, and then like the prints as well.
Well, obviously someone is interested, Andy, again, about are there obvious signs of females being pregnant? And when females mark terriers, is just to attract males, or does it serve other functions?
You know, marking territory in general is more a male thing. And so they will do it to attract males. They will do it to signal to a male. But beyond that, being pregnant, you should usually see that sort of if they're pretty close to giving birth, you're going to see a pretty big bump. You know, and once you've seen it a few times, I guess it becomes more familiar. So you're not, you know, you're not going to see a lot of fat bobcats in the wild. So if there's a bump and it's a female, chances are she's pretty close.
Well, I'm lucky and happy if I see one, you know, even if it's in the shrubs and you just, you know, or if they're crossing the trail. I don't see too many, but Irene is asking is there an approximate number for the number of bobcats in San Pedro Park?
Not yet, but how big is San Pedro Park? We could just extrapolate based on sort of a typical overlap in home range.
1,200 acres, 1,000, something like that.
Yeah, so I mean, my guess would be that there are probably 4 to 6 living in that park. They don't have, you know, they don't need large home ranges, as we've talked about. And they don't typically have them, but at the urban edge, they're probably going to be a little more compressed even, and some of them probably move through the residential neighborhoods a bit. So there's probably overlapping into San Pedro, I'd say 4 to 6 cats.
And somebody's asking if those links can be posted. Did they disappear off the chat?
I just posted it.
Thanks, Alys.
Okay. Is there anything that Zara you'd like to select from the chat section, or?
Oh, are there more questions?
I don't know. I'm checking.
Okay.
I was working on the Q&A section.
Yeah. Yeah, good, Alys. You connected to William. Yeah, that matters in Wildcat Canyon. We used to collect a lot of data out there, and there was pretty good presence of bobcats throughout East Bay. I don't really see any other questions. Do you, Alys? Are you looking at chat at all?
Yeah, I was looking at it, but I think we got most of them.
Okay.
But if anyone has any, if we missed any, just, yeah, feel free to email. I'll post the address again.
Yeah, and of course, if you have any follow-up questions, we're happy to answer those too.
Okay, so it seems like, okay, some, so if they're crepuscular, they're not really up, they're not nocturnal then, they're just dawn and dusk.
They are actually nocturnal. So I think there's just confusion. They are active at dawn and dusk and through the night, but they're also seen in the daytime. So I think, you know, all bets are off on what's traditionally been the case, even for pumas at the urban edge. And I don't think people have really given enough thought to the fact that human disturbance really changes their circadian rhythms and their clocks and how they move and when they have to move and danger and what's safe. And so I think we're seeing a lot of changes there. Whereas if you go up into the Mendocino forest, you're going to see more typical behaviors from these animals because there are no humans in their midst. So that's just something to think about.
Well, it's true. Whenever there's more human activity, it certainly disturbs everything in sight.
Yeah,
Right.
there's more research in the last few years about people comparing like areas with lots of people versus few people versus like lots of disturbance versus less disturbance, and just comparing like how animal activity patterns change across those different areas. So it's,
Right.
yeah, we're just starting to learn a little bit about that.
The one good thing that at San Pedro Valley Park, where people are not allowed to bring their dogs in. And so that keeps the wildlife much more at ease. And they seem to be, leading a much more natural life there rather than being constantly petrified by chasing dogs or whatever.
Right. In fact, Alys is looking at some of those data right now, right, Alys? So that's more specifically Puma. We're also looking at bobcats, aren't we?
Yeah, I was just going to look at kind of range of wildlife species, but yeah, just kind of looking exactly that as how does habitat use of these different animals change in areas where there's no dogs allowed versus there are dogs allowed. Yeah, if there's any like threshold that we can identify with number of dogs or people that causes some sort of change in habitat use from pumas, bobcats,
Dogs like to chase everything from squirrels to anything that moves. So
Yeah, that's right.
yeah, and then there's also the question of leashed dogs versus off-leash dogs. So yeah, there's a lot to dig into for that for sure.
Okay, so I think we've covered the lot, and if we haven't, then folks, you can always send an email to Adrian and he'll forward it to Zara or Alys, and
Yeah, we're happy to answer.
we'll get some answers. But they've been most kind, both of them, to literally answer all the questions and all the comments and put in a lot of information, extra information after their presentation. So thank you so much to both of you. And Zara, I hope you feel better soon.
Thank you so much. Sorry I wasn't on my video, but it's better for everybody that I'm not today.
That's quite understandable. And Alys, thank you. Nice to meet you. And hopefully we'll be able to catch up later and see how things, after you do some more research and get more cameras up there and so on, see what your research is, has what information and data you've accumulated.
Great. We are happy
Thank you.
to.
All right, well, take care, everyone, and thank you.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Ciao, ciao.
You just stop or do you stop? Oh, it's just there's more.